It's time to wake up and pray up here on episode number 11 of the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast. Wait, what? I think that's the title of this episode. Wait, what? Hey, we are just average, normal, everyday people doing a podcast, and we do appreciate you joining us on this journey that we've started for this Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast, just trying to put together some thoughts, some ideas on some controversial topics of the day and of yesteryear as well, I believe, is what we're trying to do in this podcast, Michelle.
Yes, it is, Wes, and this one's probably going to be a hot topic. So we'll get into that, though.
Wait, what? Did you like that? I heard you giggle whenever I did. I was practicing a little bit whenever I did it. Wait, did I do it service your title, Pierre? Did I do it well?
Yeah. You kind of exceeded expectations, if I'm being honest. But I think I agree with Michelle. Like this episode, we're going to touch on a few things that there's some question marks. Maybe things people didn't know. Maybe things people did know and just didn't realize. So there's a couple pause type moments, which is where the wait what comes in.
Well, now I do want to put a precursor because I was thinking about the show. And listen, we put up show notes. We communicate just a little bit, but we don't do it a lot during the week or during the 2 weeks. We hope to get you an episode every single week. Just things have just always come up. We're not professional podcasters, as you can probably tell at this point. But we're not professional podcasters, so things just come up in life. We're trying to get some in the bank for you. We want to get more episodes out there for you if we can, but we don't communicate a lot because we like the reactions to be a little bit organic. We are all different people. I am about a 50-year-old man that lives down here in the South. I would like to say that I'm Christian and I try to live my life a conservative way, but my background, I used to be a heathen. I was a really good heathen. I studied under a lot of the heathenomics that professors in heathenomics, they did pretty good as far as teaching me the wrong things to do. Now I'm trying to live my life the right way. I've been about 30 years in doing so. I consider myself, though, a Southern Christian conservative male. That doesn't mean, any of the weird topics that are things that the news or the media wants to put on me. I'm an average everyday guy. I go out there, I play with the kids in the neighborhood. I coach up some kids in basketball and football, just different things like that in the community. I'm very active, I'm very involved. Everybody knows me around town, and it's a privilege and an honor to be like that. Michelle, you're a completely different background than me.
I am. So I grew up in the Midwest. I'm in my late 40s. I saw some gray hair this morning that I wasn't very happy about. And, like my parents are still together. And they are just really great people. And, I was blessed with a really great family. Now, that's not to say we don't have our dysfunction. We most certainly do. And I was kind of that. I lost my way. I really lost my way probably starting about age 19 or so. And quite honestly, didn't find my way probably till I found Pierre. So I spent many years just wondering why I wasn't good enough. Okay. And it was because I was looking for it in the wrong place.
Oh. And she mentioned Pierre. Pierre is her husband, a longtime podcasting buddy of mine, and we decided to go this route of things. And Pierre, you come from a different background than I do, or even Michelle.
That's right. I think Steve Martin said it best in the Jerk. I was born a poor black child, but I'm African American, black, whatever you want to call it. I was, mostly raised by my mom. A single mom. My dad wasn't in the picture at all early on, and they kind of made amends to allow me to see him as I got older, just based off some things that happened when I was a kid and different types of stuff that I won't go into. But just as different being raised, by a single parent in a single parent home. My mom had some substance abuse issues, growing up, so was involved with a lot of that. Just seeing how that took place. Bounce house to house, stayed with my grandmother for a while, stayed with a couple uncles. And so just bounced around throughout my life and, learned some things the hard way. And kind of similar to Michelle, we kind of, met and became a thing. And I think both of our faith kind of started to grow as we, grew together. Mm-hmm. As I've spoken with in the past, my faith started to take a turn when I did lose my mom. And she went over to the other side, got me thinking into things, got me promising some things to her when she, left the earth as well. And, flash forward, now we're on a podcast talking about faith. We're leading life groups, and just a lot has changed. My life has changed, and just thankful to be here, and thankful that people, listen, to what we say.
Taking that journey with us. And it's cool to be able to have that kind of interaction with people and to be able to have them reach out to us and to be able to talk about things like that with other folks. And it's awesome to be able to do that. And by the way, if you want to get in touch with us, you can follow us on Twitter. The show handle is @FindingFaithPod. You can find me over on Twitter @Lofinit. You can find Pierre @PeeWee31 on Twitter. And you can find Michelle @Go Aaron Rodgers Gone. Aaron Rodgers 411.
What, Wes?
Huh? What? Did I touch on a nerve there? No. You can find Michelle @Go Pack Go. She's a big Packers fan, so I'm a big Bears fan, so we've got that kind of rivalry going on. But Go Pack Go 411, I just give her a little hard time. She's my sister in Christ. I can do that a little bit, can't I? I think I can.
Brother.
You mentioned like the listeners, which is great, and I do want to chime in just a couple recent comments, to give a few shout outs to those that took time to comment. So we had a Brianna Ritchie say really enjoyed the discussion. It was really great to listen to the Finding Faith, Losing Sleep podcast. Then we had another from an Olivia Byrne. This is the first time listening to your podcast. Love it, Pierre, Michelle, and Wes. This is one of the best podcasts. Hope to be together in the coming days. I am waiting for a new episode. Thank you. So thank you for leaving the comments. Really kind of both.
That was good. Next time, Olivia, whenever you leave a comment, put my name first if you can. I always enjoy that a little bit more. Go ahead. Come on. No, I'm just kidding. I try to be a little bit goofy on here. It's easier to share the show whenever somebody's a little goofy on the show, I think. But we do appreciate those comments. I want to get up to 25 comments. Can we do that? Just if you take the time out to do that, we'd really appreciate it. And it's not important to us, but it is important to Apple, to iTunes, to whatever it was. What's all the other social medias or the listening platforms people can listen to the podcast on? All of them, can't they?
All of them. Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes. There's so many. Any of it helps, help the algorithm get us out more in front of other people. So really appreciate when you come in, you comment, you rate. It does do a lot for the algorithms there.
It sure does. So I dangled the number out there. I'm a numbers guy. I like to do that kind of stuff. And so 25 comments, that'd be wonderful per episode. I'm saying per episode, Pierre. You know how I do. I like to shoot for the moon. And if I hit a star, I did okay. Wait, now it's episode 11. So people can go back and listen to some of our past podcasts, find out a little more history about us, find out some more of our stories, find out why I do act a little bit bonkers at times and why I may have a dysfunctional mind. It's not always my fault. It's just the way I was raised. But one of the things that I thought of from the last episode, Pierre, episode number 10, when we were talking about stuff, you brought up, Pierre, about Sodom and Gomorrah. And it made me start to think that I had known a little bit about the Bible, but I skipped over like Sodom and Gomorrah. I read it, but I didn't really read it. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah until I read it. And when I read it, I said, wow, that is something right there. And that made me start paying attention a little bit more to Bible and to the Bible stories. And it really, I don't want to say gets me upset, guys, but it frustrates me when people say, oh, I don't want to read the Bible. The Bible's boring. And I'm going, boring? The Bible is not boring. Man, I'd just rather sit there and watch Jerry Springer. And I'm sitting there thinking, Jerry Springer, the Bible is Jerry Springer to some degree. It's got a lot of stuff in there that makes you go, what? Wait, what? I didn't think that was in the Bible. Something like that. And Sodom and Gomorrah is a perfect example of that, Pierre.
Yeah. And so even growing up, like I always thought it was like two people when it comes to Sodom and Gomorrah, but it's actually cities. So that was one thing just I learned diving into the Bible. But yeah, wicked cities is kind of how you would describe it, and what was kind of taking place there. Shows up early on in the first book. So if you got through the first book of Genesis, you would have came across Sodom and Gomorrah and just kind of some of the wickedness that kind of spilled throughout those cities.
I think, Michelle, whenever I started doing that or going back into the Old Testament is whenever I would see something, because whenever you start reading a Bible or you turn your life over to the Lord or whatever you want to say there, you start reading the New Testament, right? And so I was reading the New Testament, and then Jesus gets up on the Sadducees and the Pharisees and those people, and he starts warning them, like, oh, it's like you're going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah, that kind of stuff. And I went, Sodom and Gomorrah, what is that, Sodom and Gomorrah? So I went back and took a closer look at it, and I was like, boy, he is comparing them to the men of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really funny that you brought that up, because literally that was the passage that I read this morning, was about Jesus telling them about how, shame on them, basically, like compare all the comparisons that he made. So that was literally my Bible reading this morning. And then, like you said, if Jesus is going to compare them to Sodom and Gomorrah, that's awful. Like, if I were a Pharisee and he said that to me, I feel like I would have to have a heart check. Like, truthfully, let's think about this. Like, let's just take, even if you take Jesus out of this example, I never want to take him out of the equation. So for this example, even if it wasn't Jesus saying that to me, like if Pierre walked up to me and said, he starts comparing me to those wicked cities, like, I think I would hope I would have to have a heart check, right? Like, even if it was somebody I didn't agree with. And I don't know. That just is mind-boggling to me.
No, and I'd imagine Pierre would have to be checking his head if he compared you to Sodom and Gomorrah as well. The crazy thing about Sodom and Gomorrah, I think last episode we were talking a lot about how people can view God and why he would do something like that. Well, why would God do something like this to some people? Well, I'm not going to say Sodom and Gomorrah deserved it, because that's harsh, right? I'm not sitting in the seat of God. I don't know. But when I look at what Sodom and Gomorrah was and what they tried to do to a couple, and I guess we got to get in the story a little bit, Pierre, just a little bit. There were two angels that came to Sodom and Gomorrah in one evening, and Lot was kind of, I don't want to say waiting for him, but Lot was there by the gate. I guess he was watching charge, or just kind of watching the scenery, or sitting out by the road, whatever he was doing. Mm-hmm. And Lot saw him, and he bowed down with his face to the ground and started worshiping him. And then he's like, okay, guys, and talking to these angels, I guess, in human form, I would take it, in human form. That's why, because I wouldn't think that they were angels like we see in our head. I think that those are more like cherubim. So I think that angels, these guys are like messengers from God that are in human form, and you can't, they don't look like angelic beings. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys.
No, that's how I take it. Even more so given, that the men of the city, kind of witnessed, like they saw them, come and join Lot, which is kind of what caused them to gather, outside of the household of Lot there. So you would have to think it wouldn't be like our perception of what, angels are. It would be in a form, of some type of human being, I feel.
I think so too. And Lot kind of insisted. So I don't know, maybe Lot was always looking for strangers that were coming by the city to stay in the city somewhere, because he knew what was about to happen if a stranger or two did come into the city, regardless of if they were male or female. It kind of appears that way. And he insisted. He's like, hey, you guys come stay with me. Yeah, just come stay with me. Wash your feet. Relax. You can kick it at my house for the night. Don't worry about it. And then in the morning time, you guys could just leave. And the two angels, they were like, nah, man, we'll stay in the square. We'll stay out here. We'll go to a hotel, or we'll do something. But Lot's like, no, you guys don't understand. You're going to come to my house. I insist that you come to my house. I know that you're angels from the Lord. I know you're messengers from the Lord. I'm not sure how all that worked out with Lot. I'm not sure why he knew, but he said, look, I'll fix you up. I'll make a feast for you. I'll prepare bread. I'll do everything for you. And then Michelle, something weird happened, right? And this is the part that I didn't understand, and I kind of glossed over. And I knew that God had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, but I really didn't know why until the next little part, Michelle. And it says that the men, this is in Genesis 19. It's in Genesis 19. They said the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded Lot's house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter, and they all called to Lot and said, hey, where are the men that are going to stay with you tonight? Bring them out to us so we may have, and my Bible translation is, and now keep in mind, everybody, before I say this, if you have little kids in the car and you're listening to it and trying to enjoy some family time, this may not be family time. This may be, go ahead and skip ahead 15 minutes maybe. I don't know. But I'm just trying to put fair warning out there, right? Okay, just a little bit. But the men came out there and started banging on the door, whatever they're doing. Bring them out to us that we may have relations with them. But Lot went out of the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, "Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly." It's almost like Lot was expecting this to happen that night. I don't know. That's the way I interpret it.
That's kind of how I understood it too, Wes. Like, he literally was like, I'm going to bring you to my house to protect you because you're going to need it. Like, basically, how I take it is, if you went into Sodom and Gomorrah, you're essentially, it's a free for all. Like, you're going to be raped most likely. So, I know that there are areas in, certain cities that people are fearful of, but man, I can't even fathom a city where if you had to go there, you had to be fearful regardless. I mean, to have people just surrounding the house that you're in and basically telling the owner, send them out to us, like, that's nuts.
And it's not the first time, right? No. This is not the first time. Lot completely expected this to happen. It feels like, and he says, "Look, I got 2 daughters. Just leave these guys alone. Don't leave these 2 strangers alone. I got 2 daughters who've never had relations with any man. Please, I'll bring them out to you. Do whatever you want to. Just leave these men alone, please." Peter, that's where I start going, okay, he knew these were men from God, right? Because he's trying to really protect these guys for whatever reason. I'd imagine because Lot's a good guy. Seems strange for him to offer up his daughters. Maybe he knew they wouldn't take the daughters. Maybe they knew that he was just trying to he was trying to play cards with them, right? A little bit chess and checkers thing, and hoping they would go away doing all these things, Pierre.
Yeah, potentially. And I think it's kind of set up a bit in Genesis 18 when, the Lord speaking to Abraham on, what's about to take place. And, it's stated, I think, around Genesis 18:20, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is very great and their sin is very evil. Basically, God was saying, I'm going to go down and see if their acts are as bad as the outcry. And, if not, we'll see what happens. And that's when, we kind of left off that last episode of ours when Abraham's like saying, okay, what if there's, just a handful that are righteous there? Will you still spare that city? What if there's, I think he was doing it more so for Lot, knowing Lot was there in those cities and how that would play out. But I mean, the setup was there, like the evil was within those cities. And I think it just kind of got brought to life there when you look at 19 and what they were trying to do with the angels. As for giving up his daughters, I don't know. It's a unique situation because I think you often hear, at least from my standpoint, the downfall of Sodom and Gomorrah, came from like a homosexuality type of standpoint and what they wanted to do to the men, where I think it's more just the evil in general and, just the desires that the city had is more the downfall of that. And that just kind of played a part in that downfall.
I'm glad you brought up Genesis 18 in that because God hears our cries. Mm-hmm. He heard the outcry of the evil that had been done, the sin that had been done in Sodom and Gomorrah. So these victims of the people in Sodom and Gomorrah, these men who are surrounding Lot's house now, he has heard the cries of these victims, whether it be male, whether it be female, whether it be boy, whether it be girl, whether it be animal, 4-legged or 2-legged, just anybody. That kind of went to a weird place there, but I don't know. I'm not putting anything past these guys in Sodom and Gomorrah at this point, right? Mm-hmm. Because it just seems like they're out for their own pleasures. Can I say that? Did I do that politically correct? Their own pleasures?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. So they get mad at Lot, and they're like, hey, you're not even one of us. You're from an outsider yourself, and you're trying to tell us what to do? Listen, we're going to treat you worse than we're going to treat these guys. And we're going to treat you all the same here in a minute. But Lot, we're about to treat you worse than we would have treated these strangers. So they pressed hard against Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men, the angels, reached out their hands, brought Lot into the house with them, and then shut the door. And then they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they were wearied themselves trying to find the doorway. And so they're like, "Hey, Lot, you got anybody else in here? Anybody else you want to save? Because with this place is about to go. We came for the Lord to see what was going on here. We've seen. It's time to go. Get your family, get whoever you want to, and we're headed for the hills. Right? I think that's how it goes here, Pierre, Michelle.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. And so, Lot takes his family, takes his daughters, takes his wife. I believe the wife looks back. They weren't supposed to look back. Yeah, don't look back. This destruction is about to come. She looked back, and the way I understood it was she kind of turned the stone, which then left Lot with his two daughters, which I think is going to get us into our next subject that we're going to talk about here.
Either one of you guys want to take the lead on that one? Because that one gets weird too. The story of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah just keeps going, taking turns. When I thought that was enough, when they left, and then his wife turned into a big pillar of salt, a rock, or whatever you want to say, I was like, "Whew, okay, I got to take a breath here. Let me take a break." And then it says that his two daughters started talking to each other, because now it's just Lot and his two daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And his two daughters are like, "Hey, how are we going to pass on our bloodline?"
Right.
And the older one, I think, says to the younger one, says, "Well, let's get Dad drunk, and then we'll coerce Dad into having relations with us each on separate nights. We'll get Dad drunk twice, and then we'll have babies by him." And I was going, "Wait, what?" That's when people tell me the Bible is boring, they don't hear these things. Now, I'm going to point out this to you guys too right now. All right. When I look at Jesus's birth story and I see the lineage that Jesus follows, when I hear that the Old Testament is written with a crimson thread woven through all the silver pages of the Old Testament, mm-hmm. I think of this story. Mm-hmm. Because it's supposed to, Jesus is a redeeming quality for everybody who believes in God, who are trying to do the right things for God, both in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and everything. This is what Jesus is what we were waiting for whenever we read these stories and we see how many mistakes God's family makes. God just saved these people out of Sodom and Gomorrah, out of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And I'm not going to say kind of justifiably so that he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah after reading the story more. And this is what they do, which seemed like the best option for them at the time. I think, Michelle, that they were taking matters into their own hands, so to speak, of passing on the lineage that they were trying to protect.
And you're right. I mean, okay, so let me back up for a second.
Okay.
Because when I read this story, which was not many days ago, I literally did wait, what? I did it too. And I really have struggled, and Pierre will tell you, I have struggled with the Old Testament for these reasons. I'm just wait a minute. Why is there so much incest? Why is there I have just struggled beyond struggling with this. And honestly, through all of our conversations, like you said, had mistakes, or what I perceive as mistakes, not been made in the past by people in the past, none of us would be here. Right. So, I mean, I remember reading, I've read the beginning of Genesis so many times, and Adam and Eve and all of that. And even then, this time I said to Pierre, now, wait a minute. How did two people create so many? Because at some point, somebody in a family had to sleep together. So I just, all of a sudden it hit me. I'm like, wait a minute. And, I guess maybe I'm just doing deeper dives now, or maybe my brain processes things differently, especially now that I'm a mom. But I just really struggled with it. And I think and I'll let Pierre talk to this, but I think what we kind of came to was, that was kind of the whole reason for Jesus coming, was to set things straight. Hold on. Yes, these things have happened. Yes, it's written, but here's how it should be. That's how I take it.
Well, I'll say my first thought is, so what was incest? We know what it is today, but what was it then? When you look at just the beginning of creation, There's two people. There's Adam, there's Eve. That's it. That's the beginning. Obviously, they are who we believe to kind of be the foundation of mankind after God created them. And so at what point did incest become incest? Because you can look throughout the Bible and see the lineage of, relatives basically marrying each other. Mm-hmm. So my thought, or I guess it wasn't even a thought, my question was, when did incest become incest? Because at this point in the Bible, it's possible it's not even something frowned upon, because God is amongst them even then when this was all taking place.
I suppose you're asking me that question. There are tough questions like this. And let me back up just a little bit on what I said, because I think I twisted my tongue and tangled my tongue up a little bit. Jesus's lineage did not come from Lot and this relationship that his daughters had with him. Jesus's lineage came from Abraham. Abraham and Lot were walking together at some point when the promises were made to Abraham, because Lot was his nephew. And then they split apart, and Lot chose to go to Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham chose to go a different way. He let Lot choose first, and then Abraham was going to go the opposite way, because both of their servants were starting to fight over whose land was going to feed the sheep, all that kind of stuff. So Jesus did not come from that lineage. He came from Abraham's lineage, right? But they're related. It's coming from the thing. And then I also want to say, before I try to avoid your question even further, Pierre, is that I think about Lot's daughters. Mm-hmm. Where did this idea come from? And I think about that because I have children, and I'm trying to raise children. I'm trying to do a right thing. I'm trying to be protective over them. And I don't watch, but I see some things like the Grammys, right? And if you choose to watch the Grammys, then you choose to watch the Grammys. But I'm going to tell you, from what I saw, the highlights of the Grammys, I'm not sure that it would be too far away from what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. It's just a thought. I'm a conservative guy. I'm 50 years old. The worst thing I ever saw was, Madonna, whenever I was a kid, rolling around on the stage in a white dress, singing the song Like a Virgin, I believe. And that was pretty rough. I knew that was taboo back then. I knew it was wrong back then. I don't think I'd let my daughter watch that today. My teenager, even my younger daughter, I wouldn't watch that. I wouldn't want to watch that either. But I'm just wondering, how far away are some of these things that we see on television, that we put in front of our kids' faces, that we let them listen to, those kind of things, away from Sodom and Gomorrah's day and age? I don't know. I don't know, guys. I'll let you guys chime in on that before I get to the incest thing.
Well, I don't think we know either. And I think the issue at hand is the context. I think that's what we're missing. That's something I always look for. I think a reason that we struggle sometimes relating to others and their lifestyles and their circumstances, potentially the decisions that they make, is we have a lack of context or understanding of what kind of led to that. And so I feel like that's the same for Sodom and Gomorrah. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the sin and the hearts there had gotten so bad that basically there were outcries, and God answered those outcries. But that had to start somewhere, and I think that's the same with this incest subject. Like, it's hard for us to wrap our minds around it because of the context that we have today, but that's not necessarily the context that took place, so many years ago. And I think that's where the hiccup is we don't have the context on how things were done even back then.
Well, I think that's where the lean not on your own understanding comes into play. But in my own understanding, it's really difficult to wrap my brain around.
So on incest, going back to Genesis and Adam and Eve, and their children and everything, you see that Cain, Abel, those guys, they were able to look around, it felt like, and be able to reproduce, right, with other people, like Cain was able to, and you got that whole story there going on what happened to his brother Abel and stuff. So this is my thought on that. When I see that, I wonder if we're just not being told the story that we need to be told to get to Jesus Christ, like his family story. Does that mean that there weren't other people? Does that mean that, God, the creator of the universe and of the world, could not create other people outside of the Garden of Eden and put people out there. And when we see in Genesis chapter 6, when we see the people looking from God's people, looking to the sons of man, looking on the sons of God or the daughters of God, you guys remember that story?
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not sure that that's angels more so than it is the God's sons looking, I think I said that backward. God's sons looking on the daughters of man or looking on daughters of other tribes and stuff like that, and starting to intermingle and take all those things in that they were practicing that weren't godly kind of things. And so to me, I wonder if that Cain didn't look outside of the Garden of Eden and didn't look outside of his sisters and see other people and start going out that way. That's what I want. Incest, could they had to have? I guess you could say Adam and Eve were kind of brother and sister too, to start everything off with. I mean, they were of the same flesh, they were of the same body. It's really, you got to back it way up. And I have a tendency to think outside the box. So maybe I think too far outside the box on something like that, guys.
Well, maybe. I mean, I guess here's the thing. We don't know. I mean, we know what the Bible tells us. But I will say there was one point where I said to Pierre, wait, this says all the other people. What other people? Mm-hmm. And that was in Genesis. So you very well may be correct. I mean, like we said, this is why we're talking about this, because we just don't know.
No, and this is cool to have conversations like this. I love Bible studies like this. And I didn't want to say this is a Bible study. It's just a conversation. And I think that a lot of times people have always, I've heard people always say, you can't talk about politics, right? You can't talk about religion with other people. I don't even know that you could talk about sports down here in the South. If you start bringing up Alabama or Auburn, it's going to be the same as trying to talk about politics down here. So, but if you can't talk about these things, then how are we ever going to become better at it? And I often wonder, since we've been discouraged about talking about these things, is that what separates us in society now and causes the divisions? I think that we should be able to talk about this stuff, and we don't even have to agree. I can agree to disagree with people.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you don't know because you don't ask in some circumstances. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this is just kind of talk out, the thoughts. And, as we're going through, our faith journey, or at least me through mine personally, I can speak for myself. These are some subjects that, that's where the losing sleep came in from. Like, I'd be up at night after reading the Bible verse. I'm like, now wait a minute, am I understanding this correctly, or how's this work? And I just wanted to talk it out, and that's what kind of brought this podcast together. And hopefully others, feel convicted to talk it out amongst themselves as well. That's how you grow. Even if you don't get the answer you want or that you're looking for, it's still active conversation to where you're learning, you're growing, and you're diving into the Bible and speaking it out with others as you're working through this process.
What do you guys think out there? Listen to the podcast. What do you think? You can always leave us a comment on whatever listening platform you like to listen to the show on, or you can send it over there at Finding Faith Pod. You can send it over to me at Lofinit. You can send it over to Pierre at Pierre over on Twitter, or Michelle at GoPackGo. Don't forget, you can email the show, findingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com. When we brought up Lot and his daughters and the things that happened there, I couldn't help but think about the stories in Jesus's lineage that really give me courage. Like I get strength from reading Genesis, from reading Matthew chapter 1, the lineage, right? And I remember, guys, I'm like, okay, all right, I've dedicated my life to the Lord. It's time to start reading the Bible, right? That's what I did. Start reading the Bible. I turned over to Matthew chapter 1. I started right there because that's the New Testament. That's why I should be listening. That's why I should be listening to the words of Jesus, all the words in red, right? Next thing I know, it gives me it felt like a million names of some I couldn't even pronounce, and I had no idea why we were talking about them, right? And so at some point I decided, I got to go back and I got to learn about these names because that's in the Old Testament. So I'm like, I got to go to the Old Testament. I don't want to go. Like, that scares me, I don't even know what is a Genesis. I remember the first time I ever read in front of the congregation. We'd get up there and, read a Bible verse of the day or read something like that. And I got up there, and I'll be honest with you, I was a little nervous. And I hadn't read. I hadn't read in a long time. I read comics, maybe. I read some sports things, but I hadn't read in a long, long time. Essentially, I dropped out of school around the 7th grade. I still went to school. I got my high school diploma and stuff, but I never went to classes. I never did anything. So I really, I'm not that. I wasn't that affluent. So I asked the guy who was giving the sermon at the time, a little small country church, and I said, what can I read from? And he said, you read from right here. And he told me what it was. And he showed me where it was in the Bible even. I didn't even know where it was. So I got up there, kept my finger right there. I looked at it. I practiced it till it was my turn. And I got up there and I read. And I said, today we're going to be reading from the book of Job. That's what I called Job Job, because I didn't know. I just didn't know. Today we'll be reading from the book of Job. And so I have gone through a long process. And Matthew chapter 1 has been so encouraging to me, because when I read the names in here and I go back and I do a little search about those names and about Jesus's lineage, and I get to read some of those crazy stories that are in there and how even these women are mentioned in here. And I think back just to Jesse was born David, the king, and to David was born Solomon by her who had been with the wife of, who was the wife of Uriah. And I'm going, wait a minute, what does that even mean? And of course, we think about, I know it's Bathsheba now. And so you can go back over there and read that story about David and Bathsheba and go, wait a minute, God used that relationship to get Jesus here? That's crazy, man. But that just shows me that God has got a purpose and a plan. And no matter how we try to thwart that plan, no matter how we might try to disrupt or disturb that plan, he's going to see it through.
This is true. And I think the plans that threw me off in my early Bible reading are the plans of the early women in the Bible.
Boy, you better slow
So as I've been diving in, like, they're troublemakers. I'm just gonna say the women in the early Bible are kind of troublemakers. Like you can start with Eve, like the forbidden fruit. Who starts that process?
God.
It's Eve. She falls for the serpent. She then shares it, with Adam. Like, don't just keep it to yourself. She shares it with Adam. But as I read, like, I see it throughout, and I just found it interesting. I know Michelle doesn't find it as interesting, but you just look throughout the early, portions of the Old Testament, like there's a lot of jealousy and envy through the women in the early part of the Bible.
Let's see. So, I'm trying to stay calm here because I'm not going to disagree that the women have their issues, but let's be clear. So do the men. And maybe the women's jealousy and all of these things are born of insecurity because their husbands are so promiscuous.
Well, let's start with Sarah. Are you familiar with Sarah, Mr. West?
I'm not getting into between this. You guys are putting me.
Well, I mean, you just start with Sarah, and
Sarah
immediately, she can't conceive at her old age. She doesn't feel she can conceive. Obviously, God tells her, down the road she's going to be able to, but she sends her husband to Hagar, right? I can't do it here.
And Abraham should have said no. Abraham should have said no, but I don't know what Hagar looked like,
and perhaps, but they have Ishmael, that takes place. Then God fulfills his promise. Sarah conceives. And, then what happens once Sarah has her kid? Like, Ishmael's playing. That's how I read it. He's playing with her son. And, the jealousy sets in again. And she's like, all right, Hagar, Ishmael, get up out of here. It's time to send them off packing. When she's the one that sent Abraham to her in the first place.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That is. And we get New Testament conversation about that too. Paul writes about that, Galatians or Colossians. He writes about that, and he talks about like there being like two mountains there, and which side you're going to be on. Are you going to be the promised inheritance, or are you going to be the promised inheritance? Of being a Christian. And so it's kind of cool to be able to read that, and how the New Testament writers even refer back to the Old Testament on stuff like that. So it's important to revisit these Old Testament stories. I think we should do more of it on this podcast, guys, because like I said, people gloss over them, or they don't realize the substantiated benefit from being able to understand those stories a little bit better.
For sure. And you will see what I'm talking about when it comes to the women. I look at Rebecca. So like look at Rebecca, with Jacob. What she have Jacob do? Deceive Isaac to take Esau's blessing. You look at Leah and Rachel, they're kind of going back and forth, when it comes to that, with their sisters trying to one up each other. And even when they couldn't conceive, they were sending, their shared husband off to others as well. You can even go further down. Like you think about like John the Baptist, who actually asked for his head. It was a female. So I don't know what was going on back then, but there was just something simmering to me with what I'm reading within the minds of these females.
Okay, so here's how I take it. First of all, there was pressure on the women to produce children because you had to have a lineage. Uh-huh. So if you couldn't do that, then you were seen less than and basically weren't needed. So there was all this pressure to be able to produce offspring, and when they couldn't do it, then they felt like they were no good. This is how I take it. And so they're trying to find a way to please their husbands. And then we learn really good lessons from their mistakes. So if mistakes are never made, you don't learn your lessons. So God can take our mistakes and make good come from them. So I feel like we don't look at the women enough, because women were, I feel like, essentially second-class citizens. Like, basically, you just do your job, have some babies, and be quiet. Like, that's kind of it. And so if you couldn't even fulfill that, and now you have to, like, send your husband to go sleep with a slave to be able to provide children for him, and then you're gifted by God, your own child, then yeah, I think there's probably going to be some jealousy there. Like, okay, I mean, I'm not saying that I would be okay with Pierre having children with other women, and especially being in the same house, and like, that would be really difficult. So
it would, but don't send me off to do it. And then once I do what you told me to do, you then get upset that I did what you told me to do. And you're like, everybody get out. Everybody get out. It's kind of how that played out. But even like, look at Potiphar. So he's like the guard, like the captain of Pharaoh's guard. And what's his wife do? She's in good standing. She sees Joseph over here, likes the way he looks, and she basically sets him up so he gets thrown in prison. She has no issues at all with a lineage. She's living life, and she's just thirsty when it comes to Joseph and gets him locked away.
Okay, so let me ask you a question.
Uh-oh.
Where do you think this jealousy comes from, Pierre?
I don't know.
The heck
I don't feel like there could be that much in the rib that we gave up in order to make this all day part.
It's going to be a rough night in the Wilson house.
Do you guys remember the story of the lady Belhamar?
I do not.
Yeah. She was in the Old Testament. She constructed dog houses for people just like you, Pierre, is what she did. Belhamar. Going back to the New Testament and thinking about those things that we've been talking about here and all throughout Housemate. And you said, Michelle, that you thought women were second-class citizens. And that to me is another proof for why we could take the reliability of the Bible to heart, right? And have confidence in it. Because throughout the Bible, especially the New Testament, you see the ones who saw Jesus after he was resurrected, women, right? Mm-hmm. Women playing a prominent role in the storytelling and the telling of Jesus and how it all came about. Let me tell you, you're absolutely right. women were thought of as second-class citizens. And if you were going to do this, if you were going to write a story as, keep in mind, I'm going to say this, it's somewhat tongue-in-cheek because you can read it this way, as absurd as the Bible is at times, right? As the story is of Jesus at times, where you got to read this stuff and go, wait a minute, wait, what? Did that stuff really happen? Well, it did. And they're using women, though, as the witnesses for this. That you would never do that back there in Jesus's time when you were penning something as big of a story as Jesus is, and as big of at the time that it was. You would never use women as eyewitnesses. You would use kings. If you were going to make up a story, if you were going to just tell make-believe stories about Jesus, you wouldn't use women's names. You wouldn't use the names of people, let alone of women, as witnesses. You would want it to be credible. You would, if you're going to make it up, you would want it to be credible. The king said this about Jesus. The prophet said this about Jesus. Not some women, not a prostitute. You wouldn't say that about. Why use them as an eyewitness to the great works of Jesus or his outstanding love? You wouldn't if you were going to make it up. And that's how I know it's true.
Right.
It's a valid point. It's a valid point.
Thank you.
One of the, I'm trying to get out of that last conversation we were in. I also know that the Bible is true on something, Pierre, you got on our notes. Matthew chapter 21. Matthew 21 is kind of a weird chapter because it has a little bit of something in there that's actually maybe not in the Bible. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Yeah. So we kind of talked about, when you look at the Bible, we talked about context earlier. And I think part of some of the obstacles with those that try to basically play down the Bible as being God's word could be missing context. And one of those pieces that are missing in most Bibles is Matthew 21:17. So I don't know what Bible you have, Wes, but from what we gathered, anything outside of the King James Version is actually missing that verse.
Yes. I got another one for you. I don't know what Bible you have, if you have one in front of you or not. Mm-hmm. Mark chapter 16. That one's going to trip you out, man, if you don't know this one. Do you know this one?
I don't think so.
Go over to Mark chapter 16. It's the last chapter there in Mark. And you can see it. It's right down there. Look at verse 9, if you got it there in front of you. Do you see it's like in a little parentheses? I don't know what that is. Like I said, I dropped out of school around 7th grade, so I don't even know what that's called.
I'm going to it now. I have it on my phone, but I'm pulling it. I got an actual NIV version that I'm looking in.
And by the way, I use a New American Standard Version of the Bible, NASB. I did some research whenever I was doing that. I had gone from I couldn't do the King James. I just couldn't. The wherefore, art thou and whatever. So I went to a New King James for a period of time, and that one kind of fell apart on me or whatever. It was my first Bible, and so I did some research, and I just went to the New American Standard Version. I liked how they constructed and how they got it through there and everything. And there's other good ones out there. The only ones I try to stay away from are paraphrased ones, even though paraphrased ones are good to use to kind of maybe help understand some stuff, but I don't know how much they go back to like a Greek or a Hebrew or to translate it. And it's usually a board of men who sit around, women too, just Greek scholars or Hebrew scholars that sit around and they try to translate. It's a whole nother episode.
So are you taking me to the 9:29? Is that where you're trying to take me?
Mark chapter 16, starting at verse 9. Yeah, maybe through verse 20 or something. Does it have a little parentheses?
Yeah. While he's looking at that, yes. I was just going to mention, one of our pastors, and I think I mentioned this in one of our previous episodes, but she actually recommended the Life Application Bible, and I love it and Pierre bought me a what's that called?
1 year.
A 1 year Bible, and so. That's awesome too, because you read part of the Old Testament, part of the New Testament each day, and you follow along that way. But the Life Application Bible is amazing because it gives you the Bible itself, but then below it explains it to you, like what it meant. And that's huge for me sometimes.
So it says the earliest manuscripts and some other ancient witnesses do not have verses 9 through 20.
Yeah. Isn't that something? I mean, like I never would have thought that. And whenever I figured that out, or whenever I saw that, I read the little part, and it's right there in the Bible where it tells you it's not in here.
Yeah.
It says, hey, this may not be in here. And I went, whoa, wait, what? And then I started thinking about it more and more, and I said, well, they are so confident in the rest of this stuff that they don't mind telling you what they don't know for sure may not be the exact words of the people, right? That this may have been added at a later time. That's how sure they are that the other words weren't added, or that they were reliable, that they were written by Mark, who probably heard them from Peter, by the way. He probably penned them as Peter dictated it to him, is the way I kind of envision this, and what other scholars, not that I'm a scholar, but what scholars envision this as well. So I take this as being encouraging, because they're like, hey, check out everything else. You can check this out too. We're just trying to be truthful. We're trying to be honest about what may not be in there. And it makes kind of sense if you think about the last pages in a book.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that fall out. Those, especially if it was a paperback book or something like that, you throw it around. I don't. Hopefully, they took better care of manuscripts than that. But if everybody had a copy and everything, maybe that the most reliable ones that they go to just didn't have that last page, because maybe the last page just got torn. Maybe it just got tethered. They go through a lot of scientific stuff to be able to figure out what is they could deem as being a manuscript and what they don't deem as being a manuscript. They use the same resources for that they use for other historical purpose books that we would look at as being reliable, and not even second guessing those books. So I'm kind of glad the Bible tells me that, hey, some of this stuff may not even be in there, so you can decipher it for yourself. And if Mark chapter 16, if the whole chapter was missing, we'd still understand the Bible. We'd still understand the story. It's not, you're not gonna lose out just because it's not in there.
I agree, but my question is, do you feel like that adds fuel to the atheist type of fire when you can point to things that are not there? Like, so why was this taken out? Why wasn't that taken out? What if something else was taken out? What if this means something else? I just feel like it opens up a can of worms. And so that was the concern. So even like the Matthew 21:17, it's ultimately talking about, the biggest and greatest weapon is, fasting and prayer. So prayer and fasting is ultimately what it says. And it references, the Mark 9:29, which is where I thought you were going to take me.
Oh.
But when you look at even Mark, 9:29, in a lot of Bibles, it leaves out the fasting part. It just says that this can come only by prayer. So why was the fasting removed? And things that keep me awake are why was it taken out of here? Because you can look at the Gospels, and there's a lot of similarities, different paraphrasing, which I just assume it to be, it's the account of somebody else, that kind of witnessed the same thing and their account of what took place. But why remove or exclude certain things when you don't remove or exclude others?
So they get a whole bunch of these manuscripts, right?
Mm-hmm. They
collect these resources from maybe old architectural houses back in the day, and they're like, hey, look at this. This is Matthew. This is the book of Matthew right here. They had one of these books of Matthew in the house. And then maybe, 2 sites down, they go, hey, I got some more Matthew over here. And then, they collect all these different manuscripts from all these different architectural places. Am I saying architectural? Is that right? I don't know if that's right. But the sites where they're using feather dusters, they're looking for dinosaurs, they're looking for all those things. Yeah. And they find all these things, and they try to make one book out of all these books, because they can date this stuff back to around the time when they need to date it to have it authenticated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe some of these little parts in here, maybe somebody wrote over there, oh, they probably meant, Matthew probably meant fasting. And so maybe 15 or 20 out of that 100, and I don't know the numbers, guys, I don't know the numbers, have got fasting written in there. But it might not be like the same penmanship that the rest of the letter was written in, right? And so maybe they're thinking, well, somebody else wrote that over the top of it. I personally, I like knowing some of that stuff is to question.
Yeah.
because once again, they're being truthful. They're being honest about it. And they're saying that we are so secure, we have so much confidence that the rest of the book is, there, that it can be documented, that this one part might not be, and I'll be happy to tell you that. They're just being truthful and honest about it. If they had something to hide, they'd hide it.
It's true. And I think that even ties in when you look at, how a lot of these disciples, died. When you actually look at the history of the torture that they went through, part of what kind of spoke to me is like, who would actually go through the martyrs and some of the ways that they lost their own life if there wasn't something you believed in. Like, I'm personally not going to get tortured over something I think's false or something I didn't witness. I'm not going to go out that way. So when you look at the deaths of most of the disciples and kind of how their lives were taken, I think that also speaks volumes for what they actually saw and what they believed took place in order for them to leave the world like that. Because we've seen, Simon Peter himself, he denied Jesus just fine 3 times. What's to stop him from doing that again, when his life was, at risk, down the line in his life. So the fact that they took the deaths that they took, to me, speaks again volumes of what they saw, witnessed, and what they believed.
A man will die for what he believes is true, but a man will not die for a lie. And you're talking about the apostles, the early disciples, who were tormented and killed, gruesome deaths, right? Gruesome deaths. If it was not true, they would have recanted, right? Mm-hmm. But they couldn't. Something told them, or they just knew that they couldn't lie about it. And when they said, "Hey, denounce the name of Jesus, or else you're going to die. Tell us that he didn't do all these things, or else you're going to die," they couldn't do it. It wasn't because they believed it was true and they were making up some story. It was because they didn't want to lie to the people who were threatening them. People will not die for a lie, but they'll die for what they believe is true. Mm-hmm. So that is a great testament too, up here. I agree with you.
And by the way, Wes, it's archaeological sites.
Oh, what was I saying?
Architect.
I sure would. Hey, let me tell you guys what happened yesterday. So you give me a free pass, maybe. I went to work, and I'm a bread man. That's my vocation. And so I get there, and one of my guys, I own 3 bread routes. And one of my guys that was on the route, he went out to his truck. He got his truck loaded and everything, and he cranked his truck. And when he cranked his truck, it went. And I'm going to step away from the microphone just a little bit. That's what it did. And I said, "Oh no. Somebody stole the catalytic converter," right? They cut the catalytic converter off the bread truck. Now, you cut it off of any car and it's going to sound loud. You cut it off a big bread truck, it's going to sound loud, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, "Oh, they got the catalytic converter." So I went out there and I looked, and I own 3 bread trucks. Well, there were 3 catalytic converters that were cut off the bread trucks that night. There was even more because they got some other guys too. So after we ran some routes and did some things, last night I turned into an exhaust man. I know how to do, small business owners have to learn how to do a lot of things. And so that was one of the things that I had to learn how to do yesterday, was to put a straight pipe on there till I can get a catalytic converter. There's a big story behind all that stuff. But anyway, so I fixed all that. I didn't know I was a muffler man, but I found out last night that I could do it. So I went ahead and I was a muffler man. I didn't get home till dark 30 last night. So that was a long day. And then today, after I got off of work, I went and coached up homeschool basketball is what I did. So I was out there playing basketball with a lot of kids and coaching them up and everything. So archaeologically, it's really close.
Yeah, sure. Close enough, Wes.
Okay.
All right, go with that. Hey, but it was a good episode number 11. Wait, what? So we did that one. We knocked it out. We talked about some controversial things, and I like talking about that stuff. I'm not sure what the show is going to be about next time, but if you out there, the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep family, have got an episode topic for us, don't hesitate to suggest something for us. And look, we ain't scared. All right, I think isn't that the old motto? We ain't scared. Is that how we say it, Michelle? Is that how Chicago Bears fans are supposed to say it whenever Aaron Rodgers strolls into Soldier Field? We ain't scared.
Yeah, you're supposed to say, "Go Pack, go."
Go Raiders, go. That's what I'll say. I'm just. Hey, but seriously, just leave a comment on whatever listening platform you like to listen to it on. Leave a positive review if you can as well. If it's 5 stars, 4 stars, whatever you can do, just to be able to promote the show, we would love that. It's cool to be able to see stuff like that, and we appreciated those comments that were left behind. Pierre, did you check the email? Did you see if we got any emails, Pierre? People don't email very much anymore.
They don't. We hadn't gotten many. We get a couple like chart stuff from different podcast sites, but nothing from the listeners. So again, findingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com. Feel free to send over questions, concerns, ideas, thoughts, applause, whatever you see fit. And I'll do my best, and we'll do our best to get back to you.
And that's a good job, Pierre, putting the show together at the Finding Faith Pod over on Twitter as well, at PeeWee31, at GoPackGo411, and at Loafing It for me, for all the different people that you're following here on this podcast. And listen, we got to ask you to do us one more favor. You pray for us, and we'll pray for you.
Amen.